The Pacific Northwest is home to booming cities, massive agricultural regions, and industrial titans. But none of it would exist without a single waterway, the Columbia River. It is a geographic marvel that carved through mountains and drowned ancient landscapes just to power our modern world. Today, this invisible giant dictates the entire West Coast power grid, high-stakes international treaties, and the survival of entire ecosystems. So why does one river control the destiny of millions? This is the incredible geographic story behind North America's most important river. The Columbia is the largest river in the Pacific Northwest, the fourth largest by volume in the United States, and it drains a watershed roughly the size of France. But to understand how this single river dictates life, economy, and power, you have to see where it comes from. Because the physical journey of the Columbia is one of the most bizarre and violent geological paths of any river on the continent. It starts far up in the Canadian Rockies, in British Columbia, at a small, unassuming body of water called Columbia Lake. At over 2,600 feet in elevation, this pristine alpine lake is fed quietly by glacier melt and natural springs. It sits perfectly still. You could stand on its shores and never guess that the water lapping at your feet is about to embark on a 1,200-mile journey that will literally reshape the landscape. But right from the start, the Columbia breaks every rule of North American geography. Most major rivers flow south or wind east and west toward the nearest coast. The Columbia does not. As it leaves Columbia Lake, it flows almost straight north. Not for a few miles. It travels north-northwest for over 200 miles. Trapped in a massive geologic trench between the Rocky Mountains and the Columbia Mountains, the river is locked in, gathering water and speed while heading entirely the wrong direction for the Pacific Ocean. So how does it escape? The answer is a dramatic U-turn. At roughly the 52nd parallel, the river hits the apex of the Selkirk Mountains and makes a sudden, sharp turn to the south. This hairpin curve is known as the Big Bend. From this point on, the Columbia transforms into a southward-flowing powerhouse. As it cuts through British Columbia, the landscape is rugged, densely forested, and incredibly steep. The river drops rapidly in elevation, building immense kinetic energy. Energy that human engineers would eventually find irresistible. After traversing over 400 miles of remote Canadian wilderness, the Columbia crosses into the United States, entering northeastern Washington. Now, because this is the Pacific Northwest, you might expect the river to continue flowing through lush, rainy alpine forests. But Washington's geography pulls a massive bait and switch. As the river winds south and west, the dense green forests simply vanish. They are replaced by a vast, arid, sun-baked landscape called the Columbia Basin. This is a high desert, sitting squarely in the rain shadow of the Cascade Mountains. It is dry, dusty, and without the river, it would be almost completely barren. Look closely at the towering basalt rock walls lining the river here, and you will notice massive jagged scars. Huge dry canyons, known as coulees, branch off from the riverbed, looking like they were carved by a waterway 10 times the size of the Columbia. How did those get there? They're the remnants of one of the most violent cataclysmic events in Earth's history, an event that ripped this landscape to shreds and forced the Columbia into its current path. Near the Tri-Cities in Washington, the Columbia makes another major turn, heading west. And right here, it meets its most significant partner, the Snake River. The Snake is a massive waterway in its own right, having traveled over 1,000 miles from the borders of Yellowstone. When the Snake dumps its water into the Columbia, the volume of the river essentially doubles. It transforms from a large river into a churning, inland sea of moving water. Now, an incomprehensible amount of water is hurtling directly west. But a colossal barrier stands in its way. The Cascade Mountain Range, a continuous wall of jagged volcanic peaks from British Columbia down to California. By all standard rules of geography, this range should block the river entirely, forcing it into California or trapping it into an endless inland lake. But the Columbia does not go around the mountains. It goes straight through them. Over millions of years, as tectonic forces pushed the Cascades upward, the Columbia acted like a giant liquid saw, cutting down into the bedrock at the exact same rate the mountains were rising. The spectacular result is the Columbia River Gorge, an 80-mile canyon with sheer rock walls rising nearly 4,000 feet from the water. As the river flows through this gorge, the arid desert is left behind, replaced almost instantly by the legendary green rainforests of the western Pacific Northwest. Finally, the Columbia surges past Portland, swings north, and empties into the Pacific Ocean, having traveled over 1,200 miles and drained an area the size of France. But that is just the geography. The real story is what happens when humans try to harness it. The Columbia does not just flow through the Pacific Northwest. It powers it. More than any other river in North America, the Columbia has been engineered into a machine. It is the undisputed king of American hydropower. There are over 400 dams across the Columbia and its tributaries, including 18 major hydroelectric dams on the main stem alone. 3 of the 10 largest hydroelectric dams in North America are on this river. The largest of all is the Grand Coulee Dam, a structure so massive it can be seen from space. Grand Coulee alone produces more than 20 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity each year, enough to power 2.3 million homes. Together, the Columbia River system produces roughly 40% of all hydroelectric power in the United States. One river, one watershed, provides nearly half the nation's clean hydropower. But the Columbia does not just light up cities. It also waters a desert. Remember the arid Columbia Basin? In one of the most ambitious irrigation projects in human history, the same Grand Coulee Dam pumps water over 300 feet up onto the high desert, transforming 600,000 acres of bone-dry scrubland into some of the most productive farmland on Earth. Today, that land grows apples, potatoes, wheat, and wine grapes worth billions of dollars every year. Without the Columbia, that entire agricultural empire would simply not exist. However, this control comes with a hidden cost. Those dams that provide power and water have turned the mighty Columbia into a staircase of slack water reservoirs. Before the dams, the Columbia was a wild river, famous for its relentless spring floods and one of the greatest salmon runs on the planet. An estimated 10 to 16 million wild salmon once thundered up the Columbia every single year, swimming all the way to spawning grounds deep in the Canadian Rockies. Today, after a century of dams, wild salmon numbers have collapsed by over 90%. Entire runs have been erased. The river that powers millions has also pushed its most iconic creature to the brink of extinction. The Columbia is not just an American river. It is an international one. More than 800 miles of its length flow through Canada, where it controls Canadian energy and economics just as much as American. This led to the Columbia River Treaty, one of the most sophisticated international water agreements in the world, signed by the U.S. and Canada in 1964. Under its terms, Canada built 3 massive dams that store water in British Columbia. By holding back spring floodwaters and releasing them in the dry summer, Canada essentially acts as a tap handle for the entire American West. In return, the United States paid Canada over $60 million up front and continues to send half of the downstream power generated by Canadian stored water back across the border. Every summer, when Seattle cranks up its air conditioners or Idaho farmers need water for their potato crops, they're relying on a decision made by a dam operator in a remote corner of British Columbia. The Columbia River is a geographic paradox. It is a force of nature so powerful it sawed through a mountain range. It is a machine so engineered it waters a desert and lights up 4 states. And it is a treaty so complex that an entire nation's economy depends on a river that flows mostly through another country. But beneath all the concrete and diplomacy, the Columbia remains what it has always been, the single most important geographic feature in the Pacific Northwest. Take away the dams, and the power grid collapses. Take away the irrigation, and the farms turn back to dust. Take away the treaty, and 2 nations are thrown into chaos. There is no backup plan. There is no second river. The Pacific Northwest does not merely live alongside the Columbia. It lives because of it. And if that river ever breaks its fragile truce with the humans who have tried so hard to tame it, nothing in this corner of the world will ever be the same.